Right, well, welcome to Rugby Borough Council's Planning Committee meeting this Wednesday the 21st of June, the longest day and the first day of summer. I am Councillor Tony Gillies, Chair of this committee. The meeting is being web streamed to the public through the Council's YouTube channel. During the meeting, when asked to speak, please use the push to talk button on the microphone in front of you. This will allow the camera to pan in your direction and everyone to hear you. Before we begin the formal agenda, I'm obliged to read out the following fire notice. There is no fire drill scheduled in the building this evening. If the fire alarm sounds, then please could I ask that you make your way out of the building, down the main staircase and out of the main doors of the town hall and can congregate at the entrance to Caldecott Park. An officer of the council will give instructions on when it is safe to return to the building. Moving on to the agenda, the first item of business is to approve the minutes of the meeting held on the 24th of May. All those in favour, please show. Okay, that's unanimous. Second item is to receive apologies for absence.
Two apologies for tonight's meeting from Councillors Mrs Garcia and Mrs Maudis. Councillor Mrs Timms is substituting for Councillor Mrs Garcia, no substitute for Councillor Mrs Maudis.
Thank you. And then we move on to declarations of interests. Declare the interest as defined by the Council's Code of Conduct for Councillors. I'll start off with the non-pecuniary for application R22/0303. Notwithstanding I have passed on representations of the Parish Council, bringing the application to committee for determination, I have no tendency or inclination that could prevent my impartial consideration of the application or ability to listen to the views of all sides before deciding upon how to vote, meaning that I am open-minded. Any further non-pecuniaries?
Thank you, Chair. I live in the ward, Myson House, Railway Terrace, and also in the ward council as well. And basically what you said previously, I reiterate that as well.
Any more non-pecuniaries? Okay, pecuniary interests. A notice under Section 106 Local Government Finance Act 1992, non-payment of community charge or council tax. We're all okay on that. We move on now for items for consideration. Before I do, I'll read out the rules and regulations. There's a slight difference in order. We're going to move item number 6, because we've got speakers on that, to item number 1. So that will be 42 Main Street, Willoughby. But we'll just read out the rules and regulations. The planning officer will speak first and present the application. The committee will be asked if they have any points of clarification from the officer. The representatives for the objectors, the applicants, and then the ward councillor will each be invited to speak. The planning officer can address any material issues arising from speakers' comments and accept questions from councillors. Any ward councillor or councillor who speaks on an application as part of the public speaking process shall leave the meeting once all speakers have completed their presentations relating to it. The committee will then go into debate on the application, asking relevant questions of the planning officer if necessary. A formal recommendation will be made and voted upon. Rules for public speaking. Speakers will have 3 minutes to make their representations. They'll be warned by a short alarm when they have 30 seconds left, and then further alarm will sound when their time has expired. Their presentation should then be brought to a halt. No extra time will be allowed. All speakers shall direct their presentations to amplifying the planning matters they have already previously put to us for the benefit of the committee. Speakers should restrict their comments to material planning considerations only. Any non-planning issues will be disregarded. Speakers should not introduce any additional information that has not been previously brought to the planning authority's attention, i.e. late items that have not been suitably considered by officers and properly addressed in the officer's report to the committee for councillors' deliberation. No visual aids or handouts may be used, and no questions to officers or councillors will be allowed. No members of the public are allowed to take part in the debate once the presentation has been given. Okay, after all that, now we'll move on to Lucy, who's going to present 42 Main Street, Willoughby.
Thank you, Chair. Presented to the committee this evening at 42 Main Street in Willoughby is application R230196, which is for the construction of a new dwelling adjacent to the existing number 42 dwelling. On screen you can see the site location plan hovering around the red line boundary. This is the existing public right of way to the side of the site. In the hatched area, this shows provision of a vehicular access that has previously been approved at the site. Additionally, at committee last month, application R230194 was granted for external alterations to number 42 Main Street, which included the demolition works, which is this area here, for this extension to be demolished and a new canopy front porch to the front. The application, as shown in the photographs here, you can see this is the single-storey extension which has been approved for demolition. This is a view from Main Street, the public footpath that runs along the boundary of the site. Looking at the view from Main Street again, currently this is the access to number 42, and additionally there will be a new access proposed as part of this application to the new dwelling to provide off-road parking spaces for both dwellings. The application site is the side garden of the existing residential property in Willoughby and is defined by policy GP2 of the local plan. A new dwelling within the settlement boundary is considered acceptable in principle. Some additional site photographs. Again, this is the site from Main Street. This is along the public right of way, and then from further along Main Street looking back towards the site. So it's this area here where the dwelling is proposed. This is the existing plans of the property. And then this is the proposed site plan. So on here we have outlined the single-storey extension that has been approved for demolition under the previous application. And then we have the outline of the proposed dwelling. As previously stated, there's the 2 car parking spaces proposed for provision at the property. Additionally, with the additional access being provided, this would then provide an off-road turning area for both number 42 and the proposed dwelling. Therefore, vehicles using this could both leave in a forward-facing gear from both properties. Here we have the proposed plans and elevations of the property. So if I highlight, this is the proposed new dwelling, which is proposed to be accessed from the side at the door shown here, and this is the proposed rear elevation. The application does propose a 3-bed dwelling. It is a 2-storey property, but there is a room within the roof space, so that's within there. There was 14 objections received in relation to the proposal, which have been outlined and addressed throughout the officer report. As previously stated, the extension and demolition was approved at number 42 in May. In terms of the design that is proposed of the property, within the terrace block, it has been proposed with a set down and set back from the existing properties. The design of the proposed dwelling is considered to comply with both policy SDC1 and W1 of the neighbourhood plan. Whilst there has been a number of issues raised by neighbours and those have been addressed, there's also one that was raised in regards to the windows that were proposed and a condition as proposed in the draft plan on the side elevation to obscure glaze those. In terms of ecology, there's considered that there can be a biodiversity gain subject to the landscape and ecology management plan condition, which is proposed in the draft decision. Additionally, as outlined, the parking provision at the site is in line with both policy D2 of the local plan and W8 of the neighbourhood plan. Flood risk has also been reviewed. It is within flood zone 1 and therefore subject to the conditions included in the draft decision notice is in line with both local plan policy SDC 5 and W5 of the neighbourhood plan. It is therefore considered that the proposed new dwelling does not cause harm to the amenities of nearby residential properties, that the street scene and character of their area is acceptable, and that flood risk and protected species will not be harmed. It would contribute to the housing supply within the village boundary of Willoughby, and is considered to comply with the relevant local plan policies and the principles of the MPPF. Therefore, the recommendation is that the application is approved, subject to the conditions and informatives recommended.
Thank you, Lucy. Before we move on to the first speaker, has anybody got any questions? Bearing in mind this was the subject of a site visit earlier this afternoon, where a number of points were raised and clarified by the officer. Any further points to raise to the... No? Okay, then we'll move on to the objector, which is Mr. Graham Hallam. You have 3 minutes.
Thank you, Chair. Good evening, councillors. My name's Graham. I live at 40 Main Street with my wife. As residents of Willoughby, we object to this application submitted by Toff Property Developments Limited. Refusal of a recent unrelated planning application, R22-1276, cited that the council already has a 5-year supply of housing land and the housing needs of the borough can be met in sequentially preferable and more sustainable locations than Willoughby. As there are currently a number of 2- and 3-bedroom properties already for sale in the village, including some that have been on the market for more than 6 months, is there in fact a genuine requirement for this development in Willoughby? Whilst the planning officer's report now states that the application is a new dwelling and should therefore be assessed as such, a number of sections still refer to it as an extension. Whether classed as a new development or an extension, Severn Trent have confirmed that the applicant would need to apply for a Section 185 sewer diversion for the shared sewer that runs within the proposed building site. There is still no mention of this within the application. The Parish Council website also identifies that due to an increase in housing since the sewers were constructed in 1961, an increase in sewer capacity is required. It is rather surprising that neither the Parish Council nor the Planning Officer have made any reference to this, despite it being raised during the consultation period, and it only raises further questions about the suitability of this application. The developer proposes to replace the existing single-storey utility with a 3-storey development, despite there being no other 3-storey properties in the area. The gable end would protrude more than 2 metres beyond the existing building line, would be far from subservient and would dominate the existing terrace at the rear. It would be overbearing, overlook a number of neighbouring 2-storey dwellings and their gardens, and result in a loss of light, privacy and outlook to the detriment of residential amenity. This and the adverse noise impact of the air source pump raised by the environmental services is at odds with policy SDC 1 of the local plan and with the climate change and sustainable design document which safeguard against such developments. The 25% reduction in the ground floor footprint of number 42 and the shoehorn nature of the proposed new dwelling would replace one well-proportioned family home with 2 cramped dwellings, with gardens of a disproportionate width to the surrounding properties, and would result in reduced amenity to future occupiers. Also of surprise is the Parish Council's failure to raise the issue of parking. It is conceivable that the development will result in more cars than available parking spaces, and with the requirement to keep the shared area clear will result in on-road parking. This will exacerbate the existing traffic issues on Main Street, something that is well documented on the Parish Council website and in the Neighbourhood Development Plan. This could also hinder the emergency services. It is not clear if a traffic flow assessment was conducted, and if so, what time of day this was carried out, as it varies considerably throughout the day. Whilst we assure Mr and Mrs Collins believe in the credentials of the proposed development, the planning officer's view that it would not cause harm to the nearby residential amenity is very subjective and not one shared by us, the neighbours, who would be detrimentally impacted by this development long after Mr and Mrs Collins has moved on to their next development project. Thank you very much for listening.
Thank you. Now, those who have noted any questions to ask, if you can just store those up until the next speaker has spoken, and then we'll ask the officer the relevant questions. So we'll move on now to David Collins. 3 minutes.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Council officers have already made the planning case to grant approval, so we don't intend to revisit those matters in detail. The recommendations speak for themselves, and the officer's report works through the pros and cons of the proposals very thoroughly and professionally. We note that there was a speaker on this application, and again tonight, who attended the last planning committee. Therefore, we wanted to say that we also attended the local parish council meeting to discuss the application, and at that meeting, local councillors raised no objections and indeed gave support for an additional family home to rent in the village. So we know that there is local support for the proposals in the village. Hopefully the committee can see from the site visit the wide space to the side of the property, space enough to build a new home, and this will be now wider given the planning permission that was granted at your last meeting. In addition, hopefully upon reading the design and access statement, it can be seen that the proposals bring forward several specific improvements to the existing. These improvements include the addition of an up-to-date new quality home built to modern day standards. That an additional home in the village will meet local demand and allow a young family to remain in the village area rather than look further afield. That the new property has been designed and will be built in a manner that is sensitive to its location and neighbours and meets planning guidelines for space between properties. That the new landscaping brings improvements to the biodiversity and ecology to 2 homes and introduces the reintroduction of indigenous plants and trees to the frontage, which is currently dominated by hard landscaping. The new property brings improved environmental sustainability of an existing property to allow it to continue to be rented out after 2025, which may otherwise be lost to the rental market. And importantly, the creation of a highly environmentally sustainable new home in a village where future options for additional homes are very limited. Thank you for your time and consideration.
Thank you. Have you got, of the points raised by both speakers, have you got any questions to address to the officer, or do you want the officer to give us some feedback on that? Okay with that, Lucy?
Hello. The first speaker mentioned the issue of sewer diversion, and my question is just related to that. He mentioned there was no mention of this in the application. Is that something you can comment on?
Yep, through you, Chair. In terms of permission from Severn Trent, that's not required. At this stage, it's dealt with outside the planning remit. It will obviously need to be addressed before any development would take place, but it is one of those matters that's outside of planning, and potentially we obviously can't determine what they would decide. It may be yes, it may be a no, and then that would be, say if it was a no, that would be an issue further down the line, but it's not something that would prevent a decision being made on the principle of the new dwelling and the design that's brought forward this evening.
Any further questions to the officer? Okay, well, in that case then let's move into the debate. Have we got any speakers? Okay, Councillor Sanderson, will you?
Chair, can I move?
Could you just say that on with your microphone live? Put your microphone live.
I'm moving the recommendation, Chair, so we can make have a decision on this.
I'm seconding. You've got a second. Right. Do we have any other proposals? Any further debate on this? Okay, in that case then we've got a mover and a seconder for approval. All those in favour please show. And all those against? That was unanimous. Okay, so that is approved. Thank you to the speakers. We now move on to what was the first item is now the second item, and that's Ruth. And that is Elms Farm, Oxford Road, Martin. I've just thought I should also do a non-pecuniary on this one, as I've done some work on this site probably 40 years ago. And those interested in a bit of history, I'll wind up the first the first gas-fired grain dryer on the site. So I'm familiar with the buildings, but that was a long time ago.
Good evening. I'm bringing two applications for the same site this evening. The first one is for full planning permission and the second presentation will be for the listed building consent. So this is application R210469 for Elms Farm. It's a full planning application for the conversion of barns and stables to 6 dwellings and the construction of 5 new dwellings. This application is being reported to committee in accordance with the scheme of delegation because it falls within the definition of a major development and is a departure from the development plan. The application includes the conversion of stables and grade 2 listed barns to 6 dwellings and with an annex to house number 1. The whole of the application site is located within the West Midlands and Greenbelt. The additional dwellings are required in order to facilitate the listed building conversions, which would not be viable in isolation. As said, application R210470 for the listed building consent is also to be considered and will be presented following this one. The application site falls within the parish of Frankton, but its location is northwest of Marton Village and just outside the Marton parish boundary. It's bordered by Oxford Road to the west and agricultural land to the north and east, and Elms Farmhouse to the south, with the River Leam approximately 100 metres to the southeast of the site. The buildings to be converted are all brick built and generally in a poor state of repair and redundant to the farming business. The most substantial of these is grade 2 listed and 2 stories high. Elms Farmhouse to the south of the site is also grade 2 listed but does not form part of this application. This slide shows the arrangement of the older farm buildings which will be used to help reference the site photographs. It's a traditional farm complex with a courtyard type arrangement. The grade 2 listed barn is comprised of buildings B, A and C here. A is the barn, B is the former stable and C is the old coach house. Between the barn and Elms Farmhouse are cattle pens and building E, which is comprised of an oak pole frame and modern corrugated metal roof. The southern wall of this building is the boundary wall with Elms Farmhouse. To the west is building D, which is a small detached building and which will provide the annex to House 1. To the east is a single-storey pitch roof brick building which links the farmhouse to the barns and also provides access to the stables. This is building F. And then I and J and G are all single-storey, arranged in a U shape with a concrete yard that's walled in. The remaining buildings to be converted are J, here, which is adjacent to the site entrance, and attached to this is an open oak pole frame structure K with uneven corrugated metal roof. To the north of the traditional buildings are a series of larger steel frame modern agricultural sheds. Whilst they're still in use for storage, they're nearing the end of their economic life, not being fully watertight and lacking security. So here we have some site photographs. We've got the front and rear elevations of buildings B, A and C. These are going to form garden houses 1 and 2. The photo to the left is of buildings I and H, the single-storey stables. These will be converted to form garden houses 3, 4 and 5. To the right is the view looking eastwards of the listed barn A, B and C here, with cattle pens and building E to the right. The photo to the left is of J, adjacent to the site entrance, and attached to this is the open pole frame structure K, and these will be converted to form Unit 6, Dwelling 6. And this is the modern sheds, which are to the north of the site, that are going to be removed. The conversion retains the courtyard arrangement and relationship with existing Elms Farmhouse. The new dwellings are number 7 here and number 11. These will both be single storey, echoing the conversions of the stables. Units 8, 9 and 10 will be here around the northern part of the site, and they will have a Dutch barn style. Here we have an example of a single storey new build unit and then a drawing of one of the Dutch barns. So the key issues are the principle of development, which involves the enabling development and the establishment of very special circumstances. The character and design and impact upon the heritage assets, also the impact on the neighbouring properties, highways and drainage issues, and planning obligations. So policy GB2 of the local plan states development will be allocated and supported in accordance with the settlement hierarchy. The site is located within the countryside and West Midlands Greenbelt, and as such development will be resisted. Only where national policy allows will it be permitted. Paragraph 147 of the NPPF states that inappropriate development is by definition harmful to the Greenbelt and should not be approved, except in very special circumstances. Paragraphs 149 and 150 list a number of exceptions to Greenbelt development. The barn and stable conversions are acceptable in principle under paragraph 150D, which states the reuse of buildings is not inappropriate, providing the buildings are of permanent and substantial construction and they preserve the Greenbelt's openness. The structural report submitted with the application confirms the suitability of the barns and stables for conversion. The footprint, scale and massing of these buildings will be retained and not extended. As such, this reuse of the buildings will help in preserving the openness of the Greenbelt. Notwithstanding this, the 5 new build dwellings fail to comply with any of the exceptions listed under paragraphs 149 and 150. Therefore, the application is required to demonstrate very special circumstances for the new buildings to be acceptable. The submitted application includes supporting information to demonstrate that the conversion of the listed barns would not by itself be financially viable, and that new houses are required as enabling development for the conversion of the listed barns. Enabling development is referred to in paragraph 208 of the NPPF, which states that development that would otherwise conflict with planning policies may be acceptable if the future conservation of a heritage asset is secured and it outweighs the disbenefits of departing from those policies. Historic England's Good Practice Advice Note 4 on enabling development and heritage assets sets out advice on this against the background of the NPPF. The case for the enabling development rests on there being a conservation deficit. Simply put, this is the amount by which the cost of repair and conversion to optimum viable use of the heritage asset exceeds its market value on completion of said repair or conversion. The local planning authority has engaged the services of Whiteland Strategies to independently assess the submitted information that supports the enabling development. The report concludes that a conservation deficit for the development has been established. Given the proven conservation deficit, it is considered that the application demonstrates very special circumstances, making the enabling development acceptable as the scheme secures the future conservation of the heritage asset. So as the site affects Grade 2 listed building and its setting, it falls to be considered under Section 72 of the Listed Buildings and Conservation Areas Act. For full planning permission, the consideration of the setting is looked at and the potential impact of the proposed works upon this setting. The scheme has been extensively redesigned from the initial submission, and following concerns from Historic England, a heritage impact assessment was also provided, and the advice in this assessment has been followed. Historic England responded in January 2023, and more information was provided to address their concerns. They have not provided further comments to the latest consultation, which includes the addendum planning statement. This sought to address their main concern regarding the adherence to the process set out in their guidance document on enabling development. This document isn't a planning policy, but it is intended as guidance. The Historic Impact Assessment advised mitigation strategies for the new builds to minimise any potential impact upon the heritage setting, and changes were made following this advice. These included the removal of an overly large modern house for Unit 7 and replacing with a modest single-storey residence, and the inclusion of Dutch barn styles for the larger units. The basic historic setting of the farmhouse and the barns will be retained. The removal of the corrugated tin roof from Building E will open up the historic view of the listed buildings from the farmhouse, removing a modern intervention. Historic England's guidance on adapting traditional farm buildings recognises the changing nature of the farming industry and states that maintaining and reusing farm buildings which no longer have viable agricultural use is a sustainable option. Current guidance by Historic England is that change does not equate to harm. And in determining this application, the concerns of Historic England have been taken into consideration and weighed against the condition and continued deterioration of the listed barns. The optimum viable use is residential, and the setting and views between the buildings would be retained and enhanced. It is therefore considered that any potential impact on the setting of the listed buildings has been considered, and the less than substantial harm of the new build units would be balanced by the restoration of the listed buildings. In terms of neighbouring properties, the closest residential property would be Elms Farmhouse. This has a good separation of 20 metres with the closest residential conversion. This conversion unit would also be single-storey, and the existing garden wall belonging to Elm Farmhouse would help to ensure potential overlooking issues would be kept to an acceptable level. In terms of the highways, County Council highways have been consulted and not objected to the application. The application includes both formal and informal parking. Conditions have been applied as requested to secure the highways access arrangements and the arrangements for the parking and manoeuvring of vehicles. The existing buildings are located within Flood Zone 2 and border Flood Zone 3. Work has been undertaken to satisfy the requirements for drainage as set out by the local lead flood authority. Conditions are applied to secure these and demonstrate the development will not increase flood risk elsewhere and reduces the flood risk overall. WCC Ecology have also considered the proposals and requested conditions to secure mitigation measures and the submission of a combined ecological and landscaping scheme. Suitable conditions have been applied. In terms of contributions, because the site has proven viability issues, contributions are not being sought. The development would cause less than substantial harm to the setting of the designated heritage assets. This carries weight against the proposals, which must be weighed against the public benefits of those proposals. In terms of public benefits, the preservation of the asset would be secured and its long-term maintenance also secured. The asset would be brought back into a viable use, consistent with its conservation and preventing further deterioration and potential loss of the asset. Economically, the development will create jobs during the construction phase and help to maintain and support existing amenities and facilities within Marton Village and the locality. Once completed and occupied, there would be 11 new homes provided. From an environmental aspect, the proposal would not have an adverse impact on the listed building or on the natural environment. This has all been fully considered, and mitigation agreed to ensure the proposals would enhance and conserve the natural environment as well as the listed buildings. Very special circumstances have been demonstrated for the new build within the Greenbelt, and the proposal for residential use is considered to be acceptable in the location and in keeping with listed Elms Farmhouse. Subject to the referral to the planning casework unit, the application is recommended for approval. Thank you.
Thank you, Ruth. Have we got any questions? Councillor Lewis.
Yes, thank you, Chair. I understand about the enabling developments that they're required in order to cover the cost of the barn conversions and so on. But are 5 new houses required for that, or would fewer number cover that cost?
So the application has been in for quite a long time, and I'm the third case officer. And at the point at which I took it on, there looked to have been 6 considered, but amendments were in for the 5. In terms of the viability assessment, 5 would be the minimum they could do in order to secure the required financing to enable the conversions.
Okay, thanks very much. Can I, one more question? I see that electric charging points have been put in, which is excellent for the cars. Is there any other kind of energy application being considered? I may have missed it. Ground source heat pumps or air source heat pumps or something like that.
At this point, no, those haven't been included. As I said, the application came in 2021, and over the course of that time has had to consider a lot of very complex issues. The electric charging points will be secured by condition, but in terms of other sustainable energy options, those haven't been included with the application.
Councillor Lawrence.
I think I had 2 parts of my question. I think the first part you've just answered very well. Thank you very much. Is it possible you could bring up the map again of the site? Apologies for this. I think it's the one where it shows the actual new development. Yeah, that one. So, as I understand it, Unit 7 is actually going into a space where there is an existing building. Is that correct?
Yes, that's correct.
So, I'm actually in favour, I think, of the development, but just for clarity, because this is Greenbelt, very special circumstances. For me, that means there is an additional massing on the road as you approach the village. Is that correct?
Yes, that would be correct, although it would be set back from the main road.
Is there any architectural picture of what that would look like coming in from that site?
No, we don't have a computer-generated image of that. If I go to the next slide, so 7 is going to be along these lines. This is what it's going to look like. So it's quite a very low-key, single story.
Okay, so that was really just my, well, we're probably going to debate on that, but I was just getting clarity on that. Okay, thank you very much for your report.
Any further questions to the officer, or do you want to go straight into the debate? Any speakers? We're all eager tonight, aren't we? I've looked at this fairly, because,
I was just proposing to accept the after recommendation.
Okay, so you're proposing
to
approval?
Accept the proposal.
Yeah, I would be happy to second that approval.
Okay, have we got any further speakers on that? You're all happy? Proposer and a seconder for approval? Okay, all those in favour then, please show. That's unanimous again.
Presentation, which is for the listed building consent for the site. This is R21 0470. It considers the 6 barns and stable conversions and the construction of the 5 new dwellings. It's being reported to committee because it accompanies the proposed full planning application for major development under the R21 0469. So the slide to the right shows the position of the listed buildings and structures and their proximity to Martin Village settlement boundary. Number 1 is our listed barn. Number 2 is Elms Farmhouse, and number 3 is Martin Bridge. All 3 are grade 2 listed. Here on the left we have the red line boundary for the application site again. So we return to our plan for the older farm buildings. I've done a blue highlight over the ones that are directly listed. The older farmstead buildings, given their location within the curtilage of the listed buildings, are considered to be curtilage listed and afforded the same protection. So this slide shows the proposed site plan with conversions highlighted in blue and the new builds in orange. As stated, the conversions retain the courtyard arrangement and relationship with the existing Elms Farmhouse and would provide 6 single-storey residential units. As has been demonstrated, a degree of enabling development is needed, resulting in the proposals for these 5 additional dwellings on the site. So a few site photographs again, this time with some of the internal pictures. Again, this one shows ABC, the main 2-storey barn, and we have a picture of the internal, part of the internal here. This is building E, again, the covered shed. This is what it looks like inside. The roof and all of this will be coming down here. This will all be taken down, just leaving this brick wall, which is the original boundary wall with Elms Farmhouse. This is a picture of J&K and the internal of them. And these pictures are intended to try and demonstrate how the views will open up with the removal of the modern agricultural units and also building E. So here we can see I and J buildings, which are going to become Garden House 5. There's a agricultural barn that will be gone. It's the same building from a different viewpoint. This will all be gone. In terms of the covered shed, in this picture you can see Elms Farmhouse chimneys just poking up behind, and again from this angle. The removal of this in particular will enhance the site, and it will return the site back to its historic form and layout. So again, a slide just showing the proposed new build designs for single and storey and the Dutch barn. And here we have an existing and proposed front elevation for the main 2-storey barn conversion. So they're reusing existing openings and retaining the opening for the big coach house doors. It's very sort of archetypical of what you would expect to see in a listed building barn conversion. So for this, the key issues are the principle of works, which have been discussed and talked about on the previous application, the case for enabling development, and the impact upon the special architectural and historic significance of the barn range. So again, the case for enabling development, we have supporting information to demonstrate the necessity to convert the listed barns, as it won't be financially viable without the new houses being built. Historic England's good practice sets out advice on enabling development. We've established that there is a conservation deficit as required. Historic England have not objected to the development but have expressed concerns. These have mainly centred on their guidance document for enabling development not being fully adhered to. It contains 7 steps that must be followed, including the marketing of the site in its entirety. So to do that would have included Elms Farmhouse. However, the farmhouse is occupied by the applicant's daughter and is a family home. As such, it's not been marketed in this way. Notwithstanding this, the result would have been the same, that some degree of enabling development would have been required to raise the finance for listed building conversions, because the value of the farmhouse would not have generated enough income to achieve all of the conversions. As stated, document GP4 is a guidance, not a policy that planning schemes must accord with, and therefore it carries less weight in the determination process. In the planning balance, and given the proven conservation deficit, the scheme secures the future conservation of the heritage asset. It outweighs the disbenefits of departing from national and local policies. So, under the Act, we have a duty to have special regard to preserving the listed buildings. The original scheme did not bear any relationship to the heritage of the site. This was the original one that was submitted 2 years ago. It's been significantly changed through the course of the application, and the new buildings have been designed to complement and enhance the historic buildings as well as their setting. The larger of the new build properties will be set away from the main listed buildings, with smaller dwellings located nearer to barn conversions, and the design and scale of these small units corresponds well, being of single-storey height. The historic significance of the barns is largely drawn from their group value along with Elms Farmhouse. The basic historic setting of the farmhouse and the barns will be retained. As shown, the removal of the corrugated tin roof from Building E will open up the historic view, removing a modern intervention. The group value of the barns in association with Elms Farmhouse will still be able to be appreciated from within the public realm. Planning guidance recognises that change to historic buildings is part of their history. Current guidance says that change does not equate to harm, and the potential impact upon the listed buildings has been fully assessed within the historic impact assessment. Whilst there would be a degree of change to the external appearance of the listed barns, the buildings are suitable for conversion and reuse. Materials and finishes will be secured by conditions. In weighing the planning balance, the concerns of historic England have been taken into consideration. The optimum viable use is residential, and the conversion of the barns provides for their conservation and long-term maintenance. Without this, the buildings would continue to deteriorate and potentially become listed buildings at risk. It's therefore considered that the potential impact on the listed buildings has been suitably considered. Less than substantial harm of the new build units would be balanced by the restoration of the listed buildings. So the development would cause less than substantial harm. The asset would be secured and brought back into a viable use, and also secure its future preservation. Subject to conditions set out in the report, it's recommended that consent be granted. We'll suggest to update that this listed building application will not be referred to the planning casework unit, only the full application will need to go. That is for consideration of the very special circumstances of the new builds in the Greenbelt. Also, condition 3 will be amended for the listed building consent to include details of the mortar to be used on the listed buildings to be submitted along with the other materials. Thank you.
Thank you. Richard.
Just to clarify a matter with you, actually, Chair, on the last application you did declare a non-pecuniary interest. I appreciate this application is linked to it, but I just wanted to make sure, was that the case with this application as well? So it can be recorded in the minutes.
Yes, please do. Yeah. Thank you. Okay, we've got any questions of the officer? Or do you want to move straight into the debate? Councillor Lawrence.
Just one clarification. This conversion of barns, has there been an inspection for bats and such like?
Yes, there has, and there's conditions as well for all the ecology matters. They've also been structurally surveyed, which has demonstrated that they are suitable for the conversion.
Okay, I've worked on quite a lot of these sort of conversions over the decades, and the skill is the brickwork. You know, where you do the repairs, where you make new arches, where you make new doorways. It's getting the right colour of bricks, the right colour of the mortar, the right mortar mix, and the right width of the mortar joint, because some workers can't do that, and that's what makes the difference for me. And I think the condition 3 pretty well sums that up, so that you know, when the work is undertaken, then things can be done at a high standard to give those buildings another lease of life into the next generations. So, have we got any further speakers? Have we got a mover for approval? Are you going to move approval?
Yes.
And Councillor Lawrence second?
I'll second. Thank you, Chair.
Excellent. So we've got a mover for approval and a seconder. So all those in favour, please show. That's unanimous. We'll now move on to Meissen House, Railway Terrace.
No, 3.
No, it isn't. It's the wrong one. It's Brockhurst. I'm looking at the wrong one. I've got my wrong glasses on. I'm sorry. Land on the northwest side of Brockhurst Lane, Monks Kirby. And we've got Chris presenting.
Thank you, Chair. This application relates to land on the northwest side of Brockhurst Lane in Monks Kirby and was subject to a committee site visit earlier this afternoon. The application is for use of the existing land for equestrian purposes, including the erection of 2 stable blocks, the formation of a permeable menage and installation of a horse walker. The application originally included installation of metal field gates at the site entrance and along the access track, but in response to preferences issued by the local residents, these have been changed to timber. There is also, within the application, provision for the erection of some additional fencing around the access to the site. To give you some idea of the perspective of this site, as you can see here, hopefully, if you can see my cursor, which you can't, towards the left of the site, you've got the development of Bond End, which falls within the original medieval settlement area for Monks Kirby. Towards the bottom right of the site and below the red-lined site boundary, we've got Brockhurst Lane, which falls within the former medieval settlement of Brockhurst. This piece of land therefore creates a little bit of a partition between the two. As indicated on the site here, we've got here, that's better, the location of an existing structure within the site, which was seen by members attending the visit today. This is in the form of a small timber shelter. And in this area below here are the remains of what was previously a former timber stable that has now been demolished. We also have the existing access track, which runs at the moment right from the entrance off Brockhurst Lane all the way through to the yard in front of the existing timber structure. And here to give you an idea of the layout of the site and where the proposed development will take place, in this area here is where the amended proposals proposed for the stable buildings and the horse walker to be, and below them in this area here would be an impermeable all-weather menage. Some views here from the site. This is taken from outside the properties on the opposite side of Brockhurst Lane, showing the existing access here And it's less clear through there, but you've got the line of the access track here. And this same access track is shown from immediately adjacent to the site access here, with this slightly raised area in this corner being where the structures and above ground development would be, and this area just in front of it being where the menage would be. Referring back to that existing structure, there's some photos here taken both from last September and this month, showing the existing timber structure that remains on the site. As you can see in the background here, we have the remnants of a hard standing indicating the location of the previous stable, which was demolished. And that again is shown here. From within the site, this top view here is taken from immediately adjacent to that timber structure at the end of the current access road. The view shows you across the rear part of the site towards, again, this raised area here, which in the latest amended scheme shows to be the location for both stable blocks and the horse walker. And again, this area that is actually falling in shadow from the trees is the approximate location for the menage. Below here, these are taken approximately from here, showing a view across the back of the site towards where the proposed structures are to be located here, and then turning to face back towards Brockhurst Lane at the top here. This flattened area here is where the proposal where the menage will be located. To give you a cleaner definition of this now, we have got here in this top corner stable blocks A and B, the horse walker, and that all-weather menage. Bounding one side of the site all the way down to under Brockhurst Lane is Smite Brook, which follows this wavy line all the way down here and then is culverted under the highway. We've got Brockhurst Lane here with the slightly widened access. We have 3 additional land drains that do not form part of the application as they don't require planning permission, but have been included here to inform members of the additional drainage works proposed. We then have our access track taking us all the way up to here, which again is where that existing structure lies, and back to the permeable menage and the structures. Here we have the 2 main blocks. So again, they're shown here in the orientation they were on that previous slide. So for block A, we have 2 stalls and the main tack and storage room, which will also be used for storing feed. And then we have block B at 90 degrees to that, with 4 loose boxes and a covered yard area for cleaning down and caring for the horses. As you can see, this being block B, that's that covered area there. So they have opening out behind and around for the horses, as well as openings onto the covered yard. Whereas for block A, you can see they only have openings on this bit here. Looking at some of the key issues for this development, the site does lie within Greenbelt, although the access off the Brockhurst Lane does fall within the village boundary of Monks Kirby. Local and national planning policy considers outdoor recreation and sport developments to be an acceptable exception to the presumption against development, provided the openness and purpose of the Greenbelt is protected. The development structures are isolated to one corner of the site, with the majority of the surrounding land remaining open and undeveloped, thereby protecting the openness of the Greenbelt and its impressionable views throughout the village. The development is therefore considered to be acceptable in terms of Greenbelt implications and principles. Looking at the character, design and landscape factors of this application, the site is one of the key views out of the village that are identified in the neighbourhood plan as being of particular local value. As previously mentioned, one of these reasons is because it provides a physical separation between the medieval settlements of Brockhurst and Monks Kirby. The land has previously been used as both equine and agricultural grazing land, and there is already a shelter on the site, as well as the remnants of one that has been demolished. So the concept of equine activity and structures is not out of keeping with this site. In response to concerns raised by residents in the parish council, the applicant has modified the scheme extensively to significantly reduce the site curtilage and move the building layout in order to retain these open views from Brockhurst Lane towards the open countryside. The building designs themselves and the materials to be used are typical of those found in rural locations throughout the borough. the inclusion of significant additional tree planting within this scheme is to enhance the natural flora of the site and sufficiently maintain the tree lines around the edges. Previous proposals within this design for external lighting have been removed from the scheme to reduce the impact in low light. And as you will see from the agenda report, in the event that members are minded to approve this application, the decision would come with a condition requiring the prior authorisation of the local planning authority before any external lighting can be installed. Looking at the conservation area and the historical significance of this location, local and national planning policy does not preclude development in heritage areas. It just requires it to be sympathetic and respectful of the heritage assets it may affect. The conservation area appraisal and neighbourhood plan place great value on the natural landscape within the conservation area, something which will be enhanced by the additional tree planting proposed. The openness of the site remains largely unaffected since the relocation of the structures to one corner, and it will still maintain that natural visual separation between the medieval settlements of Monks Kirby and Brockhurst that is a key contextual feature of the conservation area and is also prized within the neighbourhood plan. Looking at highway safety and access, significant concerns have been raised by local residents regarding the implications of the proposed works to the access. Warwickshire County Council, in their capacity as highway authority, have provided detailed guidance on the necessary modification of the existing site access from Brockhurst Lane, and the changes proposed reflect those required. The changes made to the proposals are specifically to ensure the use of the access by larger vehicles will be less of a potential highway issue than at present, even during busy times as it was at the time of the committee site visit this afternoon. There have been no objections raised by County Highways at any point during this application. They have merely provided guidance and have recognised the effects of the applicant's changes to respond to that guidance. Flooding has been a significant concern in some objections received by this application. This site last significantly flooded in 2020. The majority of the site lies within flood zones 2 and 3. The original scheme showed structures being located within these recognised flood zones. The LPA have worked extensively with the applicant to reduce the site curtilage and rearrange the proposed site layout such that all buildings were moved completely out of the flood zones, and the majority of the low-lying parts of the site remain undeveloped so they can continue to temporarily hold floodwater should it occur. To help clarify these changes, in this image here we see the original site curtilage, which included essentially all of this physical opening here. Following discussions with the applicants by the LPA, this was then significantly reduced, taking out these 2 key paddocks here and the whole of this area here on the opposite side of the Smite Brook. To give you some idea of how this affects the development, this dark area here shows the land affected by flood zones 2 and 3. And this zoomed in extract from the amended site layout plan shows that all of the structures will be located in this area, which, as you can see, is entirely outside those flood zones. The applicant has already undertaken works to improve site drainage to prevent future flooding, and even more drainage is proposed as part of this application, as you have seen. Rainwater harvesting is also proposed to both reduce surface water runoff and lessen the water supply demands of the development. This would be achieved by channeling water landing on the above-ground structures. The additional tree planting proposed will increase surface water uptake from the site and will also help to reinforce the Smite Brook banks around the site curtilage to improve flood resilience and also to limit erosion around the brook. The flood risk assessment identified that the only measures required for this development would be the raising of the floor levels of the stables and their location on higher ground within the site, both of which have been incorporated into the amended scheme. No concerns or objections have been raised at any time by Warwickshire Flood Risk Management in response to consultation. Moving to the balance now. The site is in a conservation area and is greenbelt land, and it also forms a key visual aspect of the character of the village. The majority of the site does lie within flood zones 2 and 3, and the erection of the buildings and installation of the menage will increase development within the site. However, the relocation of the structures has significantly limited the visual impact of the development and allowed the site to maintain the open nature that it has. The openness of the greenbelt has not been detrimentally affected as a result of this. The historical significance of the site has been protected, and additional tree planting is proposed to improve biodiversity provision, enhance and reinforce the natural landscape, and preserve the rural character of the site. Access improvements have been included to reduce the potential impact of conflict with users of Brockhurst Lane. An additional flood risk reduction and resilience has been incorporated into the scheme to protect both the site and adjacent land, including nearby dwellings. The development complies with all relevant local and national planning policies, as well as the ethos of the neighbourhood plan and the conservation area appraisal. The development has been amended through extensive negotiations between the LPA and the applicant to address objections raised by the local community, and this has enabled it to achieve that compliance with local and national policy. In conclusion, on balance, the benefits of enhancing the appearance of the site, increasing tree planting and biodiversity opportunities, improving drainage and flood resilience, and the appropriate nature of the development for this type of rural setting outweigh the less than substantial harm to the openness of the greenbelt, the character of the conservation area, and the aesthetic of principal views from Brockhurst Lane. It is therefore recommended that planning application R220303 be approved subject to the conditions informatives set out in the draft decision notice appended to the agenda report, and that the Chief Officer for Growth and Investment be given delegated authority to make minor amendments to the conditions and informatives outlined in the draft decision notice. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Councillor Lawrence.
Could I have 2 points of clarification? One is on the track. It's called a track. Can I be assured that it will remain a track? At the moment, when you look at the view, you can hardly tell it's a track. There is no indication it's going to be armoured or anything like that.
Through you, Chair, I've just brought up the photos again of the access. This mown area that you can see here follows the line of an existing gravelled track that leads all the way down to the existing stable structure. The proposal basically reuses this existing track. The surfacing will be renewed with gravel as it was originally, with the exception of a small section between the inner gate and the exterior gate, which, to comply with highway requirements, must be tarmacked. Apart from that, it will essentially be refurbishing what's already there. Thank you.
Okay, thanks for the clarification on that point. The next one is around the security of the site. Given that this is an opportunity for some people to use this site for other purposes, is there an assurance that it will be gated and that gated will be secured?
Again, through you, Chair, this application does include 2 gates, one to replace this one that's already existing here, and one that will be located approximately here. The sole purpose of these is to essentially make it twice as difficult to access the site in the first place, particularly by any form of vehicles, and this will further be reinsured by the fencing that flanks the outer gate, but also the application is purely for the purposes proposed, so anything else would be subject to enforcement action.
Thank you for the clarity.
Any other questions to the officer? Okay. Well, let's move into the debate then. Councillor Ward.
Thank you, Chair. One thing I just wanted to clarify on this as well. I know you said about widening the actual entrance part. I'm just kind of visualising if there's a car at the top end and a car at the bottom, is there enough space there for the one to wait off the road? I'm just trying to visualise that. Yeah.
Through you, Chair. Yes, what would happen is this area here at the moment is informally used to be able to basically come out at an angle and allow you to see vehicles either side. The proposed modifications to the access formalise this arrangement to ensure that even larger vehicles remain totally off the road whilst they're viewing vehicles and pedestrians either side. It will also mean that vehicles using Brockhurst Lane itself will have ample time to see them before they reach a point of conflict.
Thank you. Sorry, I'm just trying to visualise as well. Say if a car was trying to come in, if they could kind of wait off the road, if you know what I mean. So does that make sense?
Yeah, through you, Chair. So what happens here, it's rather difficult to show, but this verge is actually quite deep. So with this area already having a dropped curb, and with the adaptations that follow the recommendations of county highways, essentially vehicles will come in at approximately a 45-degree angle and then have room to straighten up. By the time they get to this second gate down here, the front of those vehicles will be approximately 17 metres from the highway. So they'll have ample room to get off. If, for example, they needed to open this first gate first, there's ample room to wait some distance away from that access for that to happen, and then move the vehicles totally off the site, and the same when they come off.
Yeah, through you, Chair, just for your clarity, Councillor Ward, condition 9 specifically states that the access will be widened to a minimum of 5 metres in width for a distance of 7.5 metres back from the edge of the highway footway verge. And also condition 8 then says that no gates or barriers shall be erected within 12 metres of the highway boundary. So what that does mean is that even if the gate is shut, a vehicle, or quite a large vehicle, will be able to pull off the highway and then wait and not block the road, which I think is what your question was, but also a line of sight up the access track they'll have in case a vehicle is also coming down, so it can wait there safely.
Okay, certainly issues that have been raised with me were regarding the construction of the stables. We've seen in other villages where conventional footings and foundations have been dug, and the walls have been of brick and with a tiled roof, which, because we know that the end result will only be a house, you know. So this one will just be a conventional stable built, which is a concrete slab with a short section of brickwork with timber above, as the normal way of constructing a stable. There are also concerns were raised regarding flooding, and we've seen the map as regarding the resilience measures likely to take place there should it be approved. Issues with traffic, which I think has been addressed with the dimensions we got for the new access, and the retention of the open views, which is important because those will know that we're in the debate last Wednesday with the neighbourhood plan that went through full council, that Monks Kirby were very proactive in retaining those open views because they were the first parish council to create a village design statement way back in 1999. So they are certainly custodians of what's good and what needs to be retained in our rural areas. So have we got any further comments? Councillor Harrington.
Thank you, Chair. I propose to approve. I mean, today it was interesting to go to the site, to have a look, and I think, to be honest with you, the alterations absolutely fantastic, and it's going to make a massive difference. So for me personally, I'll propose to approve.
Have we got any further speakers? Councillor Lawrence.
Yeah, I'll be happy to second that. Chair.
Okay, the advantage of going on the site visit today was clear that where the construction is likely to take place is partially hidden from the street scene from the road. That was clarified by us by the officer. Certainly the access was very important, the openness was very important, and of course the flooding, which is also important to neighbours. It is interesting to note that when you go off the road, across the verge and into the field, the land actually does drop down a little bit. So it's actually slightly lower than the actual road itself, which is, gives us some information that if it should get flooded, there will be quite a retention of water on that land before it goes elsewhere. I know it's been quite contentious with the community, but we are where we are. There's one heck of a lot of conditions applied to this, and I'm afraid if I was the developer, I probably would have given up long ago. But we've got a mover for approval and a seconder. All those in favour, please show. And that's unanimous again. Thank you, Chris. We now have Myson House, and that's Lucy again.
Thank you, Chair. Application R221035 is presented to the committee tonight as the proposed development falls within major development. The application is an outline planning application with all matters reserved. The application is for the The outline planning permission with all matters reserved is for the demolition of the existing 6-storey office block and the construction of 2 6-storey apartment blocks associated external works and landscaping. And as you can see on the slide here, we have the red line boundary that is provided of the site. The site is located within Rugby town. If you go along Railway Terrace, along here you'll get to the train station. This is the railway line behind, and then there is existing residential development, and then this is the stagecoach building. Again, I've just provided the Google Earth view that shows the existing office block within the site and the car parking provision that is there currently. Moving on to site photographs, we have this of the existing office block. Again, this is the view from the upper deck of the car parking area that is existing on site. I then had this one, which I note is very dark, so to make it clear to the committee. I've also taken some of the Google Street View images, which still, I think, accurately reflect the site. This shows the existing office block. From here you can access the site and you can see the car parking area. It was from up within this area that the previous photograph I had shown was taken from. We have other residential apartment blocks that are currently being constructed or have been completed and can be seen within this image. And this is from the other end of Railway Terrace, looking back towards the access at Wood Street and the existing building. As previously stated, the application is outlined with all matters reserved. However, we have been provided with a proposed site plan that would show how the proposed development could be accommodated within the site. On this slide, this line shows the existing office block outline that is proposed for demolition, and then the site plan is showing how the 2 blocks proposed could be accommodated within the site, with car parking and cycle provision also provided. Again, an indicative scheme has been provided that shows the proposed 6-storey block in context of the site. I would just reiterate that this is indicative and is not the plan that is up for proposal. That would come through at the reserve matters stage. In terms of the key considerations of the application, the site is located within Rugby town and therefore in line with policy GP2 is the most sustainable location within the borough and the main focus for development. As the site is a current office block, it has also been considered against policy 81 in terms of the 6 tests that are outlined within my officer report and the other material considerations in regards to the development that could be carried out at the site, either under as permitted development or the course of prior approval. But it is considered that the principle of development meets and complies with the policies of the local plan. As previously stated, following this application, if it were to be approved by the committee, there would be reserved matters for the layout, scale, appearance, access and landscaping. In terms of residential development or amenity, this has been considered by environmental health with the full assessment at the reserved matters stage. There has been conditions provided by them in regards to noise and air quality. In terms of public response to the application, there was one neighbour objection and one letter of support. In terms of highways, whilst access and the full provision of cycle and car parking would be for consideration at the reserved matter stage, based on the indicative scheme that has been provided, it is shown that sufficient car parking provision can be provided in line with the local plan policy with the cycle parking and storage and electric charging points. There was also a transport assessment undertaken and provided for assessment as part of this application, which was reviewed and amended following comments from Warwickshire County Council Highways Department before they provided no objection to the scheme subject to conditions. In terms of other matters that were considered, flooding, ecology, air quality, archaeology and an energy statement have all been considered suitably addressed subject to the relevant conditions outlined in the draft decision. Based on the major development of the scheme, there is also planning obligations which relate to open space, libraries and education, the integrated care board and affordable housing, all as outlined within the officer report, the specific contributions. Therefore, in regards to the application and the principle of the outlined development, it is considered to comply with the policies of the local plan, and the recommendation is approval subject to the conditions and informatives in the draft decision notice and the completion of a legal agreement as outlined on the screen. Thank you, Chair.
Councillor Lawrence.
I believe the approval being asked for is the acceptability of taking an office building and making it into flats. Is that correct?
It's the demolition of the existing building and then the creation of 2 new blocks that would be 6 stories in height for residential apartments, yeah.
Yeah, so you're repurposing an office block to apartments.
Not repurposing because it will be demolished. So
well, it's essentially the same thing. I mean, you're not rebuilding that. You could have put in office blocks instead of flats. Is that not so?
Yes, you could have office blocks if they were applied for, but this application is specifically.
But you are reducing the number of offices.
Yeah, there would be. Yes, there would be the loss, and that's been assessed.
Yeah, so that is what I understand is being discussed here, is that we're reducing office space, and the understanding in the most viable place in Rugby for having office blocks, that it's not viable to have an office block. Have I misunderstood the viability question?
It's not specifically, I think, the viability of it. There was the points, and it is outlined in the report in regards to the viability of having mix of both office. But the applicant has other office development within Rugby, which is where those that are currently occupying the site would go to. They have tried to advertise, sorry, that's the word, the site for office development, whilst it wasn't specifically required for this application, and they have provided the information on that previously, and it hasn't been successful in the advertising to gain. But in terms of being viable and sustainable, the site is considered the most sustainable location for any type of development. It's not there's not any difference between whether it's office development or residential.
Okay. Do you want to carry on?
Okay, second question, really. I mean, it does have a car park. This is probably the most desirable place to have a car park in Rugby as well. And it's a very, very congested area. There were 4 coaches parked outside it at 8 o'clock last night because the railway wasn't running. So we are suggesting that we're putting 2 6-story buildings and saying there'll be no parking provision. Where there is an area, absolutely there's no parking possible. And it's, I can't even see how a bicycle could run out in that place at the moment.
Councillor, we've got Councillor Bill Lewis next.
It was me. It was me, Chair, actually.
Through you, Chair. And going back in terms of car parking, there is still car parking proposed. There's 110. I will double check, but this whole area
my
under the
apologies,
proposed
it's just
site.
on the picture. It's
Sorry, so if I can highlight to you, all of this area is still proposed for car parking with both a lower and an upper deck. It still remains. This whole area is proposed for the cycle parking. Obviously, this is just indicative, but there is the parking provision for if the indicative scheme is for 120 units. Indicatively, with this site plan, there could be sufficient car parking spaces provided in line with the policy of the local plan. But it would be subject to the reserve matters.
We've got Councillor Sanderson next.
Thank you, Chair. Can I draw members' attention to page 81 of the report, 20.9, health. I would declare an interest there as the Beech Tree medical practice is one I attend. I noted in the heads of terms it's going to get a contribution towards the Integrated Care Board. Is that because the surgeries in that area have the highest level of people suffering from respiratory and heart failure conditions due to nitrogen oxide and sulfur dioxide ingestion?
Through you, Chair, I'm not provided with patient details that would link to specific health conditions. It's specifically going to them because they're the two closest to the development site. It's linked to...
I'll put that on hold for the moment, Chair. I'd like to come back on transport and road safety when we go into debate.
Just to remind members, this is an outline application. It's not reserved matters. So clearly you could actually, make all your points well known to make sure that all your concerns are addressed at the reserved matters. I'm sure you will. So I've got
unknown tonight, Chair.
I've got a list. I've got Councillor Harrington.
Thank you, Chair. Question we'll be asking is what was actually on the highways report, and also as well, when you're demolishing the actual building itself, there's obviously going to be extra wear and tear on Railway Terrace, Wood Street, or possibly any of the streets around there. Will the developer or the person doing it should be putting money through the section S278, part of the 106 funding, to resurface or improve the roads surfaces around there?
Have we noted that? Any feedback?
Sorry, could you just repeat your first question?
The main question is, because you're going to have heavy good vehicles going up and down, and Wood Streets are very congested with the freight at the bottom of the street, and also you've got the stagecoach as well. You're going to have wear and tear on, especially Wood Street. You're going to have wear and tear on Railway Terrace and things like that. Shouldn't the developer be putting money towards a resurfacing or speaking to the Highways Department? And second question would be, what sort of information do we get from Highways? Because I'll save it for debate, but would be interested to see what report has come back, not just a letter say it's been approved.
Through you, Chair. In terms of the wear and tear and any contributions towards that, there was none specifically requested by the County Council, and therefore without the request it wouldn't meet the SIL requirements for it to be added to the section 106. In terms of the highway information that was received, there was a full transport assessment carried out by the applicant that was submitted for consideration by the Highways Authority. This looked at access to public transport. It also included a trip analysis of the proposal, which concluded that there would be reduced movements if the site was used for residential compared to that of the office development. And there was also monitoring done, or a sweat path analysis in regards to bin lorries only using the access at Railway Terrace, which is also included as a condition in the draft decision.
Councillor Carrier.
In the photo you have shown me, there is a car park and it is a commercial car park. Is that commercial car park part of this building plan at the moment?
Yeah, I believe it's all under the ownership of Stepnells that currently own both the building and all of the land. So it would go from being a commercial car park to that for the residents of the proposed buildings.
So it's our understanding that they are going to make the commercial car park into the resident car park when the building is up.
That's what's shown indicatively on the plans that we have received, but the exact car parking and access is a part of the Reserve Matters application, not the one that's forward tonight.
Thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Just to come back on the first point that Councillor Harrington mentioned about, I suppose, wear and tear or damage on the highway by developers. If there was undue wear and tear or damage to the highway network, that would be then a matter for the highway authority to raise with the developer and take action. And so the recompense could be done through that part of their own highway legislation. It wouldn't be for the Planning Act to actually address the actual damage to, I suppose, additional third-party land.
Just again to clarify on that point, that Railway Terrace being public highway is adopted as such and therefore maintainable at public expense. So reiterating what the DM manager is saying, that clearly if there was damage to the public highway, that would be for the highway authority to bring action against that person causing damage to the highway.
Don't forget we've got the do you want to come back? Sorry.
Yeah, I just want to clarify that. So nothing in the planning application at all that the developer is responsible for the planning stage of the wear and tear of the highways, because I've heard something different and I am quite confused now because highways have told me something different. It should be part of the planning application. Now, I'm confused now because highways have told me, I had a meeting with highways a couple of weeks ago. No, it's more than that, 4 or 5 weeks ago. And it should be something within the planning. Now, at the moment, I see a conflict between a borough and county. So I'm a bit concerned because the reason I brought this up tonight, the cattle market development has completely ruined, put extra strain on Wood Street, Railway Terrace. I mean, there is some resurfacing Craven Road, which is going ahead in a couple of weeks' time. But I feel, for me personally, we need to look at this and integrate it together. I mean, highways would be great to be here tonight, to obviously to explain what's going on. But I've heard something different, and I need me to clarify this before I can actually make a decision on where I vote tonight.
Okay, I mean, I'm assuming on this application will be a construction management plan anyway that would actually address certain elements of the construction process. But obviously going back to actually, if someone is damaging third-party property that's outside the application site, then I understand that would then be a matter for between the developer and the highway authority. The government guidance is very clear that we've got to be careful in planning that we don't overstep what our duty is as a planning authority into using other legislation that we actually aren't have any power over. So my understanding is it will be dealt with by the county council through the Highways Act. Obviously, we can put information into the construction management plan. That's fine. That can be a condition on the application if we haven't already got one.
Condition 13.
Thank you. Yes, condition 13 obviously addresses that element of construction, and that can certainly be beefed up to actually make sure the developer is aware of their obligations with regard. Because obviously, there's obviously been other development in the area along Wood Street that's obviously been a concern to residents and the impact that's had. So that can be something we can take away and make sure that is also mentioned in the construction management plan. But I just wanted to be clear about which legislation we are using here in order to perhaps necessarily take any action.
We've still got speakers on the list. Councillor Srivastava.
I think parking issue has been raised. I don't know what information we have got from highway authorities. If we go in the morning and evening, a lot of people who pick up people. It's quite busy area, that area. So I don't know what assessment have they made about the parking. I think that's very important to look about public with how the flats are when these things are built up. This will affect the parking or not on the streets. And coming back to the open space, you've already commented. That area looks like to me very concrete full. So I hope with the comment there will be some green revolution there, and also some kind of open space for people very near to the station. It's very important to consider that. I already made a comment.
Councillor Lewis has been patiently waiting.
Yeah, actually, the question I had has been partly answered, but I'll ask it again in a minute. But in the meantime, something else come up which I can perhaps contribute to. This is the condition of roads that are used for construction and so on. We got an actual situation like that in Rugby and Overslade, where when the new schools were being built up on Rugby Fields, they used mainly long furlong as the main access route for the large trucks and so on. And in the meantime, since then, traffic used it regularly, and the county council will come out and repair potholes and so on. But I've asked on a number of occasions, they won't look at the general condition of the road. It's based on the normal measurements they do on highway condition. They won't look at it especially for the fact that it's been used as an access road and so on. So that's one thing. The other thing was I was going to ask about access routes to the new blocks of flats. But it, again, has been partly answered, because access to that area from the south is fairly straightforward, come through the town and so on. But if you want to go or come from the north, it's quite restricted. Mill Road Bridge is a restriction, and even on Newbold Road there's a restriction because of the bridges, the railway bridges there. And I want to know whether that will be taken into account. Could have all been sorted out when the West Coast Main Line was being rebuilt, because there was an opportunity then of widening those bridges, but the County Council chose not to do that because of the cost. So I think we're paying for that at the moment.
Right. You've opened up a can of worms. The officers are going to come back.
Just in terms of the comments that were raised, firstly in regards to parking, as previously stated, whilst there may be the opinion of it being the busy area, as previously stated, in regards to the indicative plan, the parking that could be provided would meet that and would comply with our local plan policy, but also is not a matter for consideration this evening. That is reserved for a later application. In terms of open space, landscaping is also a reserved matter and would be considered at the reserved matters application if the outline is approved. There is also a contribution would be required under the section 106 for open space contributions as included in the report. And again, in terms of access, this is also a reserved matter. It's not part of the application this evening. That would be looked at the reserved matter stage.
I think let's move into the debate now, because certainly those that want some evidence of what damage has been done to the roads and what have you can only look at Bayard Place and Rounds Gardens, where all those have been pretty well. Certainly Rounds Gardens is pretty well on the floor now, and Bayard Place has been for quite some time. I haven't actually witnessed any damage because I'm on those roads 24/7, or near enough that. So, but the comments have been taken on board, and the officers have got them down in bold print. So, Councillor Neil Sanderson.
Thank you, Chair. Again, I'll draw your attention back to page 81 regarding public transport and road safety. I am very concerned regarding the tone of the responses on this report. And we can't do this, we can't do that. For years, as someone who's lived in that area for well over 20 years and used to walk down Railway Terrace for 12 years to get the train, we have wanted a public access route to the railway station. And it is feasible, it is possible by using off-street routes and local routes. In fact, I've went out and did a study of it with County Councillor Sarah Finney, Tim Snazzle from Warwickshire County Council, Colin Horton from Open Spaces, Henry Biddington from Air Quality and Community Safety, and we know the routes are there. But, again, we're not asking, there is a proposal in here for sustainable transport, a contribution of £10 per dwelling. So it's not that, but it's fobbed off with Condition 21. Well, Condition 21 is the chocolate. It's a chocolate teapot in essence. It's some guidance on where you might get some public transport, and that's about it. It's not worth the paper it's written on. So what I would like I'd actually like to defer this application and for the officer to go away and talk properly to the county about how we can get those sustainable routes, those safer routes, reduce the air quality impacts on the local residents in the area, because that is one of the key requirements nowadays under air quality monitoring, and how we can actually fill in the gaps, and there are horrendous gaps in this report when it comes to transport. Then we can have sustainable transport. Then we can look at the reduction of the vehicles on the local roads, and they're very busy in your ward, councillor. I know that for a fact. Indeed, I think it's one of your concerns about HGVs and tyres, I would suggest, is about the particulate matter that's generated by those HGVs, which is one of the pollutants that causes people most health harm. So what I would like, Chair, is to perhaps just looking at deferring this for the officer to go back and talk again to some of the people I've been talking to about producing sustainable routes, transport routes through the area, reducing the impact on the local residents, and looking at whether they should look again at that £10 contribution. Thank you, Chair.
Okay, we've got Councillor Sivastava.
I think, as Councillor Stilton produced, we need a lot of information which we haven't got it. And I think if we can defer it, that would be better. And get all the information on the transport strategy, and everything is very important in the area, very near to the station, and is highly sensitive area.
Are you both proposing and seconding deferral?
I'm seconding
it. A highways officer to come here the next time this is presented to committee?
Yeah, that will help.
Well, just to say that we can invite them, but whether they come will obviously be a different matter, because they've assessed this already. So we've got one further speaker, Councillor Harrington, and Councillor Lawrence.
Thank you, Chair. I agree we defer. The reason I'd say this is I've had meetings as a ward councillor for Ben Ward. If people have been on this planning meeting before, I'm normally a speaker, and I had 2 Freedom of Information Acts, one's on Windsor Street and one on Claremont, and they haven't got any data, parking data or data from there. I've spoken to, I can't remember the name, Iton Hill, and basically he's looking into getting data from the Ben Ward and having a look at the traffic impact and things like that. So this is why I question the highways, because I don't think the data's there, and they've already admitted that to me in a meeting. So I think we need to go back, have a look. But if you want a person who walks it, looks at it, if you look at Murray Road every day, that is clogged. Railway Terrace can be a nightmare, getting out of Wood Street, getting onto New Bold Road clogging up. I think we need to look at, it's great having these, we need houses, it's great, but we don't seem to put in the actual infrastructure to go with it to make it viable for everyone. And I think we can't keep just pumping stuff into Ben Ward. We've had issues with HMOs, which I'm trying to deal with, but this is really key because, I mean, I think it will go through anyway eventually, but I just think there's no thought between Borough and County. They need to speak together because it looks like there's a miscommunication here. So I think we've got a great opportunity now tonight to defer it, take a step back, have a look at it, and then say, even if it's a meeting with highways, with the committee here tonight, and discuss this, because I think this is very important for the future of rugby.
Just as a point of clarification, obviously you're telling us about kind of extraneous information requests that you've made and information from the county. In the interest of absolute clarity, the officer here, in providing a report, has consulted with the Highway Authority, being the County Council, who are responsible for matters in connection with the highway. What she's done is reported what the Highways Authority have told her following her consultation on this particular application. So her hands are tied in the sense that what she's doing is reporting what County Highways tell her. There's clearly a proposal on the table which has been seconded for a deferral, and as the chairman has indicated, we can invite a County Highways engineer or a Highways representative to come to the meeting to directly address those questions. But in terms of the linkage between Borough and County, it's clearly a county function, and we do consult with them because, as is our duty in terms of their right to make representation on a planning application. So it's not for the want of trying in terms of that consultation process, and the officer has clearly reported the comments back from County Highway. So in terms of the proposer, seconder for deferment, and we can certainly invite a County Highway representative to come and attend the meeting to specifically address those specific questions that you might have.
Chair, you're aware that this was raised at a recent meeting, that we weren't getting the information and the data that we require to make legitimate planning decisions from the County Council. Now, we said that then, it still holds, and I think we still need to push it though. We've got a good window of opportunity at the moment because they're doing a consultation on the Rugby local transport plan. So let's strike while the iron's hot.
Richard wants to speak.
Yeah, I just wanted to confirm that obviously the application before members tonight is for outline only. We only have indicative numbers for the amount of residential properties for the site. So whilst planning obligations for a site need to be addressed at the outline stage, some of the matters that have been raised would obviously be addressed at a later date at reserved matters when we knew what numbers we were dealing with. So what I'm just conscious of is that by deferring the application, we as officers may not have any further information when the application comes back than what you have now. Councillor Harrington's already mentioned that, you know, through his FOIs that he's done on neighbouring streets, that the county has not got the data that he was seeking. Now, obviously, you know, we are under pressure from the government to determine applications without delay. So, you know, how long that information, you know, we can't necessarily hold up development waiting for evidence bases to come forward. You know, the application has been put to members tonight following consultation with the Highway Authority, and we've obviously got their response. You know, I appreciate why you want to defer it, but I just want to make it clear that we may not necessarily have any additional data for you when the application comes back. We can also request the Highway Authority attends, or representative attends. Obviously, we can't force them to, but we can obviously put that request if the application is deferred. Thank you.
Clearly, we can't prejudge what the officer comes back with, but we don't ask, we won't get.
Okay, I've got Councillor Lawrence was next, and then Councillor Ward.
If I'm allowed, I would like to change the subject back to my point of clarification, being that I would like this outline to actually show alternatives rather than just say it's for flats. It doesn't bring out that this also could be for offices. So the renewal of the site, I'm happy with. I have concerns I would like to express tonight about the fact that it will reduce office space when we are looking for a place to put in a business hub within Rugby at the moment. So it seems to be counter the local plan when we have no need at the moment in the local plan for additional housing.
Yeah, through you, Chair. Obviously, as members will be aware, we can only assess the application that's actually before us. The applicant has no obligation to put forward alternatives as part of the outline. So what they're seeking for, and I think this is where perhaps an element of clarity is being sought right at the beginning, was that this application is for the demolition, so it's total loss of the office block on site. So it's the principle of them putting residential in that place. That's what's before committee tonight, not any sort of mixed-use scheme. The reason the clarity was asked about, or stressed about demolition, was that I understand through other increased powers now through the General Committee Development Order, is that if the Meissen House itself was retained as a structure, that they could then go down a route of actually, possibly even without planning permission, of changing that building to residential use anyway, which we've seen elsewhere in the locality. So I think it's at Woodside Park at the rear, where I think some of those units have changed from office to residential. And obviously, in some cases, that's either done through a prior approval route, where the principle's already established, or it doesn't even need planning permission to do it. So that potentially is what is the fallback position, I suppose, on this site that the developer could exercise.
Yeah, so thank you for the clarity, but I think it's what I wanted to do was express a concern. So should this come back to full planning, and it be for this, I would struggle to approve it without seeing some mixed use in this development.
Yeah, through you, Chair, just one point that I would point out in terms of the information that was submitted in regards of the application and the tests that are outlined in policy ED1. One includes one of the tests is the redevelopment of the site for economic use if it could be brought forward taking into account site characteristics, and if employment redevelopment is not viable, whether mixed-use redevelopment could be brought forward, demonstrating consideration to alternative layouts, business plans and smaller premises with short-term flexible leases for small to medium-sized enterprises. In terms of response to that from the applicant, which they gave for us as consideration, was that whilst the existing building is structurally sound, it does not provide high-grade office space inside. The continued use and future use of the site for office accommodation would therefore require a significant level of investment into the property in order to be able to compete in the office lettings or sales market. The commercial market is such that demand for low-grade large office spaces are limited, particularly when high-quality flexible workspaces and serviced office accommodation are available nearby. They've presented that converting the building into smaller, high-quality spaces for rent to small to medium-sized enterprise businesses or as service office accommodation would require financial input that would not be recoverable through rental rates, and therefore there is their consideration that the continued use of the building as office accommodation is therefore not viable, and that was considered in the assessment of the application.
I would look for some independent surveying on that, I have to say. We are in 2023 now, we're not in 2021. The railway is up to 83% capacity, having been down at 20%. You're right next door to a railway, and the reason I use that railway is to go to an office block. So I find it difficult. I would like to have an office block in Rugby. So I think we have some local planning level concerns that will come through. The local plan is due to be renewed, and I would actually be looking for this to be almost deferred behind and full planning behind that local plan if we are continuing on this route.
Councillor Ward.
Thank you, Chair. Mine kind of coincides with a bit of both, really, because I know we were talking about the roads and the highways and things, and I was just going to point out about if it's flats, if it's offices, it is right by the railway station, so I would imagine a number of the people, either residents or either if it's offices, a number will be using the railway. So I do think that actually, I know it's always a concern about transport, but it is right by the railway station. So, and obviously, I know this is only outline plans where they're showing a number of parking spaces, but yeah, I just think it is by the railway station. So, yeah. So you see what I'm trying to say, basically. Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah, I think we just seem to be forgetting that point, that it is right by the railway station.
Don't forget, the existing building was built around about 1970, 71. You know, old technologies. You know, it's been converted and altered over the decades, no doubt. But the landowners, and as you're probably aware, own a significant amount of land in Rugby and manage that very, very well. They've probably done all the background work on this and know exactly what is going to be best in that area. And don't forget, it's already been outlined to us that it is, you know, an outline application. Is the principle of a development there acceptable? And in which case, if that is the case, then the reserve matters will come before us, where we can do the fine tuning. For me, I think it is probably approvable as it stands at the moment in outline, and you know, to move things forwards a bit. Councillor. We can vote on that deferment.
If I could quickly just come back on one point that was made by Councillor Lawrence, in terms, you'd made the comment about not being in 2020 anymore. The information that was provided in regards of policy ED1 in terms of economic development was provided to the local authority in March of this year, so that was when we received that information with the application.
The ORR updated its railway use figures in June, so that will be out of date.
So we've got a proposer for deferment and a seconder for deferment. All those in favour of deferment, please show. And those against, please show. That's 7 for and 3 against. So that's deferred. Whether we get any information back is another matter, but presumably we can get that information, whether it's a yes or no, Richard, fairly quickly.
I mean, again, through you, Chair, we can ask the questions and we'll see what information we get back. Timescale will obviously, we'll see. It obviously may not be in time for next committee.
Chair, I'm sure members will be only too helpful in providing those questions to the officers.
Okay, thank you. That would be helpful, thank you.
So if those that have got those questions and concerns, can you email them straight through to Lucy, please? Okay.
Yeah, there's a... Yes, thank you, Chair. Councillor, sorry, if you send through the list of your questions, then I can send those through to the Highway Authority so that we can make sure that all matters are addressed, or at least have asked the question for whenever the application comes back. Thanks.
Okay, then we'll move on to the next one, which is going to be presented by Sam Green, and that is Sarah Mansfield, Main Street, Willie.
Good afternoon. This presentation is for a resubmission application R230032 at the Sarah Mansfield Public House on Main Street in Willie. It's for the use of the first floor of a public house as let in bedrooms and the erection of one dwelling in the rear car park. The application is being reported to Planning Committee in accordance with paragraph 5.2.3e, which requires applications that have received 15 or more letters of objection to be referred to the Planning Committee for determination. The application in question has received 15 public objections. The above site images show the public house to Sarah Mansfield. The right image showing the front elevation and the left image demonstrating the prominent positioning of the pub on the corner of Main Street. The aerial image demonstrates the overall variance in the pattern of development, with backland developments present within the locality, and again the prominence of the public house on the corner of Main Street, as well as the overall scale of the rear of the site, which is to be used for the proposed dwelling and the associated amenity space. If you just see on the laser pointer, it will be just there at the rear of the site. Prior to this application, there have been previous planning applications on the public house, and also an attempt to list the public house as an asset of community value, which was appealed and removed as the 9th of July 2021. The most relevant history for the site is the prior application, R220012, for the use of the first floor of the public house as letting bedrooms and the erection of 2 dwellings in the rear car park. This was recommended for refusal by the officer and then refused by Planning Committee on the 17th of August 2022. That refused proposal was then appealed and allowed, and therefore the site currently has an extant permission to build 2 dwellings and convert the first floor of the public house to letting rooms. On this side, we can see the allowed extant appeal site, and again hit the 2 dwellings and the associated rear amenity space located at the rear of the car park, and the conversion to the public house. On this slide, the appeal elevations and the floor plans for the 2 dwellings at the rear. And these are the allowed floor plans for the restoration of the ground floor of the public house and the creation of 6 letting bedrooms on the first floor. So this is the current proposal. In comparison, the resubmission in this proposal reduces the number of dwellings on site from 2 to 1. It will add 1 further bedroom, resulting in a 3-bedroom dwelling sited in the same position as the extant permission. Internally, the dwelling would feature a living room, kitchen and WC to the ground floor, with 3 bedrooms, a bathroom and an ensuite to the first floor. The reduction in the second dwelling allows for a larger amenity space sited in a similar position. The proposed dwelling will be 5.75 metres in width and 9.8 metres in length, and at approximately 4.8 metres to the eaves and 7.49 metres to the ridge. The first floor windows to the front elevation will be obscure glazed, with a front-facing canopy porch and side-facing bifold door featuring at the ground floor. The only materials specified are facing brick, and therefore a pre-commencement condition will be applied to any decision notice in order to ensure appropriate materials are used. The public house conversion is identical to that of the extant permission, with the restoration of the ground floor to be used as a public house and the 6 letting rooms to be added to the first floor. Just for your consideration of this part proposal, this could be carried out regardless of the outcome of this permission, due to its identical nature to the currently extant appeal permission. There were 15 representations received concerning insufficient parking, traffic issues, concerning with alterations to a HMO, out of character of the proposal, an increase in noise, an unsustainable development, and an impact on the village water supply and sewage works. The key considerations for the development of the principle of development: the application is located in the rural village of Willey, and therefore development is permitted within existing boundaries only, including the conversion of existing buildings where national policy permits. The purpose of policy HS3 of the development plan is to prevent proposals that would result in a significant or total loss of a site or premises currently or last used as a public house. As a core function of this proposal is that the public house remains as a public house and in fact would be renovated from its existing state. The principle of this aspect of the proposal is considered acceptable. A main theme of objection was deliverability. The inspector for the prior appeal found there to be no requirement for the refurbishment of the public house to be carried out prior to or concurrently with the construction of the proposed dwellings, and deemed the introduction of dwellings at the rear of the site to be acceptable on their own merits. In terms of highways consideration, the leading highway authority took a stance of no objection to the proposal subject to conditions. In assessment of character and design, the proposed changes to the public house are identical to the appeal scheme, with the first floor windows, a new window to the first floor and a new door to the ground floor. The allowed appeal is currently extant, and therefore these works could go ahead regardless of the outcome of this permission. However, it is considered these changes do not significantly impact the aesthetic of the public house and do not feature in a prominent location and would therefore be considered acceptable. The appeal proposal was refused at Planning Committee due to substandard size and inadequate amenity space for the dwellings. The appeal decision establishes that the size of the dwellings within the previous submission do provide adequately proportioned living space and amenity space. In consideration of this, the current proposal provides greater amenity space and similar living space and therefore is deemed acceptable. The materials for the dwellings, again, is to be safeguarded under condition to ensure an acceptable design. In terms of the impact on residential amenity, the appeal decision determined that the appeal proposal would not create a dominant or oppressive feature or have an overbearing effect upon the rear amenity space of the neighbouring property, and as such there would be no harmful loss of outlook to the occupiers of Star Cottage. It is deemed that this proposal has a similar impact and therefore would not be deemed significantly detrimental. In terms of technical consultations, Environmental Health were consulted on the application and had no objection to the proposal, subject to the conditions requiring the submission and agreement with the LPA of an investigation into potential contamination of the land and a potential remediation scheme. Warwickshire County ecologists did not respond to this application. However, under the prior application highlighted that the site has no specific nature conservation designation and therefore had no objection to the proposal, subject to a condition requiring bird and bat boxes being included in the fabric of the buildings. This would ensure a gain for biodiversity as part of the development. Just to note, this condition was also included on the inspector's decision notice for the appeal. The Highway Authority took a stance of no objection, subject to a condition which requires the development is not occupied until the space for parking of cars is provided and a construction management plan be provided. Therefore, in conclusion, the proposal is considered suitable in principle and all valid objections raised by respondents have been assessed and considered in the decision. No technical consultees take a final stance of objection to the proposal, subject to the conditions and informatives. Planning history does form a material consideration for decision making. The inspector and the appeal decision establishes that 2 dwellings are acceptable to the rear of the public house. The appeal also deems there to be no significant impact to residential amenity for the 2 dwelling development in the proposed position. The appealed permission remains extant and therefore, if members were minded to refuse the application currently under assessment, the 2 dwellings could be developed, as well as the alterations and conversion of the public house, which is entirely identical. The balancing exercise, therefore, does reducing the development from 2 dwellings to 1 create a greater harm than the original proposal, enough to warrant a refusal. In the case of officer's assessment, it is considered that the reduction in scale in fact reduces and alleviates the impact of the prior extant proposal, and therefore, on balance, it is considered that the proposal should be approved subject to conditions. Thank you very much.
Councillor Lawrence.
Probably a question through you, Chair, to legal on this one, just to understand. We refused under a number of different conditions. I understood the appeal was based upon the need for additional residents within Rugby, when I believe we do not have such need. So there was no need for it. So I didn't understand the reason for the appeal going through. So it was just a point of clarity on that was what I was seeking.
So as part of the 2 original refusal reasons, a need wasn't actually identified in either of the refusal reasons. So just to go over them again, the policies used were planning policy SDC1, and that was in relation to the nature of the dwellings in terms of living space, national space standards, and also the quality of the amenity space provided with the dwelling. Also a consideration of the site in its entirety, the mixture of uses of a public house, and the suitability of a car at the foot of a public house car park. The second refusal reason was in terms of impact to Star Cottage, which is the neighbouring property. The inspector found that both of the dwellings are acceptable in the rear, and they did not find that they were an oppressive feature.
Okay, so I think for me, it's just really a comment that I knew of a number of other reasons for refusal. We stopped at 3. We could have had up to 6. And I think maybe we have to look at that in future, because we're building in a car park, we're stopping that being a functional pub. It's got 6 residents going in plus another house. It was stopping it being a functional pub was the other reasons. I have to accept the appeal. I understand that, but I just wanted to raise that at this point, that somehow we feel as if I think we made the right decision at the time. Obviously, we stated it incorrectly, the number of refusal reasons, but...
Through you, Chair. Just to state, at no point in this proposal has there been any loss to the public house. Through both of the proposals, the public house is to be converted and re-established. So at no point has the local planning authority supported the loss to the public house.
The point was, I do remember the debate quite clearly, with 6 new residents in there, that's 6 more cars. With this house, you've got another 8 cars. You're losing ability to use the car park for people visiting the pub. It's a pub in a remote site. You have to have car parking to use the pub.
Just in terms of, obviously, there was greater discussion under the first application. That was a more intensified site because of the dwellings. The stance that Highways took and the steer that we take from them as the leading highway authority was one of no objection. This application that we have in front of us today actually reduces the dwellings down, so the no objection has followed again.
Absolutely understood. I was just trying to make the point not to go into debate.
Next.
Just to make a bit of a point of clarification with regard to appeals, although we as the local planning authority may have refused the application on 3 grounds for refusal at the time, obviously the inspectorate does then consider also the third-party representations that were received. So if neighbours had raised concerns about highways, the inspectorate would have given that due consideration, although I suspect in the case of the highway authority, who they will regard as the technical experts, raise no concerns, will obviously find that reason for refusal, if the inspector felt it, then didn't warrant that to be the case. But it is just to say that often inspectors don't just solely look at the reasons for refusal, they'll also take account of any third-party representations made at the time. And we as an authority have to copy and send all those third-party representations when an appeal is lodged as well, so the inspector does get the full picture, partly just for your reassurance, really.
We've got Councillor Harrington and then Councillor Sanderson.
Thank you, Chair. I've walked around that village, and that's quite a tight bend when you're going past the pub. I'm very surprised we're going to lose a lot of parking spaces for the residents going to be there. And also, it's a pub you can't walk to. You're going to have to drive there. And also, being a tight road there, I'm very surprised they haven't brought anything up because it's not wide. So my concern is, yet again, obviously watch highways. I'm not against them, honestly. But it doesn't make any sense. I mean, it's the first time I've looked at it, but I remember walking around it, and it doesn't make any sense. And how they can suddenly put 6 people in there, and then another resident as well. Plus, you've got relatives, friends, people coming, and things like that. And then you've run in a pub when you've run into Sunday lunches or things like that. How's that highway going to cope without all that extra volume? And also, what volume? It'd be interesting to find out what volume of the pub expecting to do, how many covers are going to do, how many people are going to get there each evening and things like that. Are they going to do a darts, whatever? Because I think it's going to cause a lot of congestion on that there's only one road in, one road out. It's very small, isn't it?
Yeah, through you, Chair. Just to sort of track back a little, obviously we have the appeal decision now. So just to reiterate here, that the exercise that we're carrying out is more of a proportional assessment on how this proposal that we have in front of us for one dwelling is going to compare to the appeal decision we have. In terms of what you just said, some good points raised. There was back and forth with highways under the first application. There was originally a stance of objection, which was then overturned through a technical note provided, which will have addressed some of the matters that you've brought up. But just in terms of what we're assessing here, is one dwelling going to impact the highway more than the two dwellings currently there? It would be of my opinion that it would actually reduce the impact.
Councillor Sanderson.
Thank you, Chair. I was a bit concerned about the conversation, the way it was going. We put in more reasons for refusal than that. I was taught long ago by a very experienced planning officer that two good reasons for refusal put forward that are sustainable and could be upheld by the council are much better than a scattergun approach. So I think that's a lesson to us all, this application. Concentrate and make sure that if you're going to refuse something, you refuse it for the best of reasons.
Thank you, Chairman. Just to reiterate that point, for those of you who actually attended the planning training, which should be everybody, I did actually explain that in a former local authority, we won on appeal but went down for costs. And you ask me, how did that happen? You won the appeal. Because one of the reasons for refusal was highways, where the highway authority did not object to the application. So because we had given a reason for refusal as highways when there was no evidence to give that reason for refusal, we had to pay the costs of the appellant because we had been unreasonable exposing them to defend that reason for refusal. So that's absolutely correct. More is not always more.
Councillor Eve Hassel.
Sorry, through you, Chair. I just do want to say on this point of obviously the refusal reason that's coming up now, in terms of the principle and the way the inspector found the principle, and it was explained in the original officer report, obviously we are within the village boundary, so getting into the realms of unsustainability would be quite difficult, although there is sequentially preferable locations to form a refusal reason around something within the village boundary would be in my opinion, would not have been suitable. And just the inspector's take on that, I won't go through the whole thing, but in terms of that point, they have just concluded that they have no reason to disagree with the stance on not providing that as a refusal reason.
Councillor Eve Hassel.
I'm just wondering, with this property in the rear garden, I accept that it's been allowed on appeal, and I do think one house is probably better than two. But is it tied in any way to the hotel, to the pub, or can it be sold independently?
Yes, so we sort of back into the realms of the deliverability. The first application, in consultation with the legal officer at the time, deliverability for this scale of development couldn't be something that we could bring into the planning assessment. What we do have to do is we have to take things on face value and upon their own merits. The merits of this planning application, as stated by the applicant, are that they are going to bring the pub back into use. Therefore, it brings benefits in. So in terms of does anyone have an onus to complete a planning permission from top to bottom, in this case the answer would be no. Can we make assumption elsewhere? No, we have to take it on its face value, which is for the conversion of the pub and the erection of the dwellings in the rear garden.
Councillor Ward.
Thank you, Chair. I was wondering, because I just wanted a point of clarity, could we have the slide back up with the actual proposed dwelling? Just because I know with the two properties, I noticed that it was just, wasn't it just the window on the front, the ground floor?
So that is the appeal dwellings. That's a currently extant permission, so they can go ahead and develop that now as the appeal is allowed. Okay. I think you're referring to there's one window on the first floor and one at the bottom floor of the front elevation.
I think I missed the windows on the top floor.
Yeah, in comparison, this front elevation window, it does have a landing window furthest to the right, and then the three windows on top. Just to note, they are obscured, those first floor windows. They are obscured.
Yeah, that's what I was going to ask as well. Yeah. So it doesn't overlook anything. Yeah, thank you.
Okay, we were due to have a speaker on this application tonight, but because the news of the appeal being allowed, clearly that speaker hasn't arrived because, you know, we're at a point now which is the lesser of the two evils. I'd be... I've got to be honest. I'm going to have to move approval on this, and I'm also going to appeal to the developer, because I do hope he's going to watch this. Because I'm going to appeal to the developer. If he's going to build anything, build this one and not the other one that is extant, because that way he's going to keep on board with some of the residents. So we're going to move forward. I'm going to move approval.
Yes, Chair, I would like to second that for the same reasons. I think this is a much better development and have previously been advised. So yes, I would like to approve this.
Okay, if we've got no more speakers, shall we move that to the vote then? All those in favour of approval? That's unanimous. Thank you. Right, we'll move on to the next item on the agenda, which is the advance notice of site visits.
I have no further site visits. Thank you, Chair.
And the usual one on the agenda, delegated decisions.
Just a note.
That's all noted. In that case then, being no other business, that's the end of the planning meeting. Can we stop the live stream? Thanks.